Do you want to learn how to build a PC without risking expensive mistakes? Maybe you want to practice the process before you actually get your hands on your parts. Or maybe you just want to daydream about what it would be like to actually own a 30 series graphics card. If you answered yes to any of those questions, you need to try PC Build Simulator, an ultra-realistic simulator game that will teach you exactly how to build a PC from start to finish, or so they say. Today, I'm going to be walking through PC Build Simulator and making an exact replica of my very own PC and talking about just how realistic it actually is. I'm Matthew from the Rig Monkey team. Before we get into today's video, please consider subscribing. We have lots of content planned. Also, we'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment down below and tell us the biggest challenge you face when building a PC. Let us know down below. Enjoy the video. Alright, so here we are in PC Build Simulator, and today we're going to be building a complete replica of my personal PC. Now we're actually going to have my PC featured in probably the next video on this channel, but we're going to try and build it in-game with all of the exact same parts as much as we can, and I'll walk through the process and kind of go over how it differs from actually building in real life. So here we have the case. This is actually the NZXT H510i, which is a bit different than my case, but they didn't have my case in the game, which is forgivable because it's such a minor difference. There's so many minor differences between this case and mine. It's mainly a fan controller and RGB strip, and the fact that this case supports vertical GPU mounting. I don't believe that mine does, but I'm actually not even certain. I don't do it myself. But otherwise, it's kind of uncanny how similar this case looks, and we're ready to get started and get building. I should say that we're in free play mode, or I think free build mode, so there's no budget constraints. We have access to all the parts. The campaign is also pretty fun, but you're pretty limited in the beginning, so that's why we're doing this. And we're going to get started by removing the panels, just as you would in real life. Got the front panel there, and the back panel with the two thumb screws on the back right here. And otherwise, this case looks virtually the same. It does come with these two stock fans from NZXT. We're going to remove the top one because that one's going to get replaced by an RGB fan that my real PC has. The back one actually stays, but I think we might have to remove it to install the motherboard, but we'll wait and see on that one. When I built my PC, I actually left it in, although it was pretty challenging and removing it might make it a little bit easier, but we're ready to install the motherboard. So if we go to install here and go to motherboards right here, you can see they have tons of different options in this game. Some of them are already not compatible with this case, but we're gonna go for the ASRock Z390 Pro 4 is my motherboard. And you can see they have two different configurations on here. One is the micro ATX and one is the ATX size. I have the ATX one and it looks very similar. However, it does appear we do need to remove this fan, so okay, we'll do that first. Got the 4 screws here. It's a little bit simpler than unscrewing them in real life because you just hold left click. And here it's asking us to install the standoffs. I will say that this case in real life actually came with the standoffs already pre-installed, but that isn't always the case, so it's a good idea to learn how to do it. We're just screwing in all the standoffs here so the motherboard can sit on top of them. And now the motherboard goes in the case just like this, and it looks virtually identical to mine. I'm not sure that mine has these bits here. I think the styling might be a bit different, but it's very, very similar. It's definitely close enough that there might be minor differences that ASRock does in different parts across like the years or something like that. But we're screwing in the motherboard there, and it seems to be in place. The I/O shield does just kind of pop in place in the game. In real life, that's one of the hardest parts of building a PC because you'll have to put it in from the inside and kind of punch in all the corners until it clicks into place. It can be really challenging, and I actually bent this one like a tiny bit when I built my computer because I messed it up. So it's nice that you don't have to do that, but that is something that you don't want to forget when you're building a PC in real life, because otherwise you'll kind of have a bad time and you'll have to take the motherboard back out, and you want to do that before you put the motherboard in. But our motherboard's in place. One other thing I should mention as we open up the CPU socket here is that when I build a PC, I actually put the processor, the RAM, the SSD, I put it on the motherboard before it goes in the case, and the CPU cooler as well, but you can't do that in the game, and that's okay because you don't necessarily have to do it before. You could totally do it the way we're doing in this video, but it's kind of up to you. But you don't have that option in the game, but that's okay. Now we're gonna go to CPUs here, and I know that they'll have my CPU in the game because it's one of the most popular CPUs right now. It's getting a little outdated, but not too much. It's the Intel i5-9600K, and we're gonna pop it in right here. As you saw, we opened up the CPU shield first. You just hold left click, but really you'd have to press down on this little lever and slide it out before it can go up. And we'll drop in the CPU right here. It doesn't ask us which direction to put it in, but you can kind of just look at the text and make sure it's okay. If you really want to be sure, you can see on the corner of the CPU, there's that little marker on this bottom left corner, and there should be a little dot on the motherboard as well. And you would line those up, but the game doesn't really ask you for that, and you can just kind of look at the text. So it's probably fine. We'll close the CPU shield here. In real life, if you were building, this is where the plastic cover on the CPU shield would pop off, and you have to press down really hard. It kind of feels like you're breaking something because you'll see that plastic cover snap. You'll hear it snap and it'll pop off, but maybe this is a used motherboard so you wouldn't have it in the game. They just didn't include that, but it would look a little bit different. Otherwise, the CPU is all installed though. You can see this lever went down and then slid back under that little latch there, and it's all in place. Let's do the RAM. Okay, so moving on to the RAM, I have the G.Skill's Trident Z, and I have 8GB sticks. We need a space there. At 3000 megahertz, there's tons of different options here, but I believe mine is going to be this one right here. I have the RGB version, of course. I did open up all of the memory clips here because if you don't open those, it's not going to go very well as in real life. But installing the RAM is a little bit simplified in the game for two reasons. The first being that you don't have to choose which direction to do, if this side goes on the top or if it goes on the bottom here. In real life, you'd want to look at the slot and look for a little notch and line that up with the notch on the stick of memory, but you don't really do that in the game. The second thing is I don't think this game actually cares which slots you use. However, we're installing four sticks, so it's not going to matter. Set that filter right there so we can get 4 of the same stick, just like this. But normally you'd want to go with, like, I believe it's this slot and the slot on the end, so the second and fourth one for this motherboard. But you could read the manual of the motherboard, or sometimes it'll actually tell you. I believe this one tells you, like, right here. There's like a little label that'll tell you which ones to use. You can like look at the user manual as well. But there we go, all 4 of our RAM sticks are installed. Now let's do our solid state drive. So if we go to storage here, I have a 500GB SSD. As we can see, there's not that many options for storage in this game, which is okay because who really cares about like their storage anyways. I have a Crucial SSD, but I'm not exactly like too worried about repping Crucial or anything like that. We can just go with a similar 500GB solid state drive here, which I guess is going to be this one. We're not going to go with the RGB one because that's not what I have in my build. So we'll go with this one from Gigabyte right here, and we'll put it in this first slot. There is another M.2 slot down here, but I installed it in the top one right up here. So if we can move our camera, hold left click right here, and as you can see, again, it's asking us to screw in the little standoff for the M.2 SSD. This motherboard actually came with it pre-installed, but maybe sometimes it doesn't, so I don't mind that at all. We'll screw it in there. You can see the SSD's popped in and pressed down, and we screw it in from the top just like that. That's one of the easiest parts to install, minus the screw being super tiny. That part is pretty challenging. Otherwise, it's pretty simple though. Not too much to worry about there. And I know from experience that before we put on our CPU cooler, we're actually going to put our fan on the top right up here because otherwise it's not going to fit. This game is kind of strict about clearance, and if you try and like do things in the wrong order, they're not going to fit. Now in my build, I actually did switch the fan without taking off the CPU cooler because it was a bit of a tight fit, but I was able to do it. But still, we'll go in the natural progression of things for the sake of the game. And one thing I'm going to say is that my fans actually are not in this game, which I can't fault the game for it. As you can see, there's tons and tons of options here. My fans are just like a third-party Amazon brand. It's called upHere, I think. Not exactly a household name. We're going to go with the Antec Prism fans here because they look about as similar as you can get for mine. Mine were like a 3-pack for 30 bucks, and they're just controlled via remote, whereas these actually connect to the motherboard, but it's okay. It'll do the job. And one thing I should note is that this game actually doesn't tell you which direction the fan is blowing, or it doesn't ask you, whereas in real life you'd want to make sure that it's either going to be an intake or an exhaust fan. For me personally, this fan on the top is an exhaust fan. You can see that it sucks in the air here and blows out from the top, but the game kind of just makes that decision for you, which would be really great to see, like, you having that option so you can really learn how that works. But you know, it's a minor detail, so it's not a huge deal. If we go to tools here, we can grab the thermal paste. Our CPU cooler actually came with its own thermal paste in like a little ketchup packet type thing, but we're gonna squirt it out of the tube right here, right onto our processor there. And also the game does not let you choose how much thermal paste. That's all you can do. I can't exactly add any more. It'd be kind of cool if you could like draw it on there and try different patterns. You know, some people say to do like the plus or just the dot in the middle or an X and things like that. But that's a little bit advanced. We have just our bit of thermal paste right here. And we only have one option for thermal paste, but you can't really go wrong with any of the major brands, so that's not a huge deal. Now we're gonna go and find our cooler, which is the Freezer 34 from Arctic. We have the black and white one, and they actually don't have our exact cooler because my PC has the dual one that has a fan on either side, but this was the one that I meant to buy. I actually just bought the wrong one when I ordered my parts. It was virtually the same price, and the performance is the same. I've used these in a bunch of different builds, and it didn't really make a difference, to be honest. But we're gonna install it right here, and now we can choose the direction, which is kind of cool. However, for this build, like, it wouldn't really make sense to do any other direction than just taking in air from the front and blowing it out to the back. So that's what we're gonna do right there. And one thing I will say is that you can see the clearance is super tight here between the front of the cooler and between the RAM sticks, which is completely accurate because my PC, like, they're virtually touching. So it speaks a lot to the proportions in this game. These are like perfect to scale replicas pretty much, at least judging by this. So big pro for the game here, but this is a pretty big simplification for installing this cooler. In real life, what you'd have to do is come behind and put the back plate on here that they just don't even have installed, or like you can't even see it, which is probably the biggest divergence this game makes from real life. And then you'd have to screw like the cooler into this little like sidebar on either side. Then you'd screw in like the little, almost like standoffs, I guess, from the front into the back plate, and then you put the thumb screws on top. Kind of a long process, but I think it's probably because so many coolers have so many different ways of doing it, especially depending on the socket and AMD versus Intel and things like that. They probably just didn't want to get into detail for this game, and that's okay. But that's the biggest divergence I think that we're going to see until the very end of the build. But it's looking good so far. We have our CPU cooler, our processor, our RAM, our solid state drive, and one of our fans. So next we're going to install the power supply and then the hard drive, and we'll come around the back for that. Now they don't have too many power supplies in this game, but what I will say is that mine is a 650 watt modular power supply. I guess I don't include that in the title, from EVGA. I think, is there a space after the... I wonder why more aren't coming up. These are all the 650 watt ones. I believe mine, I thought mine was in the game. Maybe the wattage isn't in the title. Yeah, I guess not. So I have an EVGA one, 650 watt, and I believe it's going to be this one. I don't know that this is my exact PSU. I have it written down somewhere, but honestly, I don't care what kind of PSU I have. What I can tell you is that it's 650 watt, it's modular, and it's 80 plus gold. That's all that really matters to me. But we're gonna go ahead and install it in here. It looks very similar, so I think this is the exact same one. What's nice about it being modular is that all of the cables don't come pre-attached, and you can attach the ones that you actually need, and it makes the cable management a lot easier, and also the installation a lot easier, so you don't have to worry about like jamming in all these cables when you install it. It works really well. That's why I like going with modular PSUs, but you don't always have to go for them. Kind of depends on your needs. But we'll screw in these 4 screws on the back of the case right here, and now we're going to go for the hard drive, which is going to go in the hard drive tray in the back here. Again, they don't have a lot of storage options in this game, but it's your hard drive. I don't think anyone has like too much pride for which brand they're repping in the back of their case in the hard drive tray that you can't even see. So we're just going to go with this one from Seagate. Mine is actually from, I don't even know the brand of my hard drive. I think it's Western Digital is what it is. It's a Western Digital 4 terabyte hard drive. So this one's going to be similar. It's Seagate, 4 terabyte. Close enough. We're just going to install it right there. When I actually did my build, I removed the hard drive tray and then screwed it into the side just so it was a little bit more firm in place there. but you don't necessarily have to. It's your call. It's a little bit simpler in the game, but that's all good. We're all good in the back here now. I think the last thing we're gonna install are the fans and then the GPU. I should say that I do have a Wi-Fi card and a USB expansion card in my PC, but they don't have those in the game because they're so minor, like it's not a big deal. They go in this slot and this slot right there, but we're not really missing out on much. Let's go ahead and install these fans first. This game is a little weird that it makes you take out the dust filter before you can put fans on the front here. Personally, I removed the entire fan cover and screwed them into there, but you don't necessarily have to do that. That's more like if you're using a radiator that becomes more important. But we're gonna grab 2 more of these fans. Again, they're not the exact same ones I have, but they're about as similar as we'll get. And we'll screw them in right here. And as you can see, now it shows to mount the fans the other way. So it's gonna suck in air from the front and blow it towards the back of the case. The intake is on the side right here. That's the same configuration that I use, but it doesn't really give you the option to choose. So I would have liked to see like a choice there so you could choose the correct one and kind of learn that process, but that's okay. We'll go ahead and install these right here, and then we'll put the dust filter back on the back right there. And there we go, our fans are installed in the front of the case. It's kind of weird though, because you can see the fans are actually on the inside, like on the inside of this cover, or whatever you call this, the fan cover here. It's probably a little tough to see on video, but you'd probably want to remove that fan cover in real life first, but then it doesn't let you screw them in, so the game's a little odd in that manner. But you know, it's still pretty good, it's pretty accurate, and thus far, we've used virtually the same parts. Unfortunately, they don't have my graphics card in the game, which is a bit of a letdown, but I do have a 3060 Ti, which is relatively new, and you know, it's only been out for I think 7-8 months by now, so they're a little bit behind, but there's a lot of graphics card variations, so you can't blame the game. As you can see, this is the only 3060 Ti in the game, which is nothing like the one I have. So we're actually gonna go for an Asus 3070 instead, because this looks exactly like my graphics card, except for having a two 8-pins for the power instead of just one 8-pin power connector, which is a minor difference, but not a big deal. It wants me to mount it vertically, as you can see here, but we're not gonna be doing that because my case doesn't support it, and it's also not good for airflow. We're gonna put in the top PCIe slot back here, but before we do that, we have to remove the covers in the back here. So let's go ahead and remove this one and remove this one. Again, there's the vertical mount here. Mine has like this weird cover instead that's like a cover for these slots, but it doesn't even really cover them. I don't even know exactly how that thing works, to be honest. It's a little weird, but we can just leave that closed right here. You can see we're still able to screw in our graphics card right there. And this is another thing that, you know, when you're doing it in real life, you kind of want to have like that feeling of knowing how hard to press down. You want to listen for the click, so you can hear when that slot closes. There's these slots on the bottom here, and like this slides open. Once you push in the graphics card, you'll hear the click and you'll know that it's in place. But you don't really get that feeling from the game. But you know, that's something you kind of just have to learn by doing, I guess. So what can you say? It's still pretty cool to install a graphics card, and how many people get to install a 30 series card? So we know you can't get one in real life, so at least you can do it in the game, right? Now we're gonna plug in the power though. I believe those are all of our parts. Oh, we do need the fan on the back here, let's not forget that. If we go to case fans, we're just gonna go with the NZXT Air. This case comes with the 120mm black fans. So we'll screw it in right here. And now we need to do all of the cable management, which is the biggest part that this game kind of simplifies or makes it a lot easier for you. Because as you can see, it illuminates all of the different things you need to plug in, which makes it a lot easier, but it's a good thing. I wish we had this in real life somehow, because you would never forget to plug in the power connector for the processor or something like that. It just does it for you, which is really nice. We're gonna go ahead and choose some white cables. If we go... Oh, cables here, okay. If we go to cables, I have like white kind of ribbon cables, or braided cables, I guess is what you would call them. So we'll go with these. I think these are the most similar to mine. We're gonna plug into the motherboard right there, and then plug into the PSU, and as you can see, it automatically routes the cable for you, which I wish I had this in real life as well. Makes it a lot easier. Normally you'd have to kind of think about, well, should we route it through here, or through the top, or through the bottom? Obviously for the motherboard it makes the most sense to go through the side, but sometimes there's a bit of a decision to make there, and the game does it for you. But you know, it makes it a lot simpler, and if you're just learning, totally fine. You just want to make sure you're paying attention to what you're actually plugging in so you can learn the process. This one's for the motherboard right here, the 24-pin connector. Next, we're going to plug this in on the top. This actually powers the processor, and we'll plug that back down into the power supply. One thing that I should say on my PC is that my white ribbon cables, or braided cables I guess, are actually extensions. So they plug into the cables that already plug into the power supply instead of plugging directly into here. I think most people probably use extensions, but maybe that's just me. I know like the RGB ones are also extensions. I don't have a lot of experience plugging directly into the power supply, but maybe that's what some people do. But you want to make sure you know that distinction. Now, my cables are like a male to female cable, so you literally couldn't plug it in here if you wanted to. But anyways, small detail, very minor. Next, we're going to plug in the graphics card though. As I mentioned, we do have two 8-pin connectors here on this 3070, whereas my 3060 Ti only has one, but it works just the same. It's going to plug right into the power supply right down there. And now we need to plug in everything else. So we'll start with the fans. The CPU cooler is going to plug into the motherboard right here. And then this fan actually would also go directly into the motherboard here. But I think, let's see, is it going to let me? Yeah, then it wants me to daisy chain these fans together, which doesn't really make a lot of sense. This is where the game gets a little weird, because this isn't an RGB fan, but this one is. So this would have to go into the fan hub. So we're actually going to remove this connection right here. And instead we'll plug this into the fan hub, and then this one, the only option it's giving me is plugging it into the other fan. I'm not sure why that is, and my fans are so cheap, like they don't even support plugging into each other, so I literally can't do that. But same thing here, we're going to plug into the fan hub, and then this one would also go to the fan hub for me, but it's going to plug into this fan. When you have nicer fans, you can just chain them together so they don't all have to plug into the hub or into anywhere else, which is really helpful, but you know, it's because the fans are a little different, so you can't blame the game for that. Next, we're going to plug in the fan hub into the motherboard and the USB header right here, so it can be controlled via the software that you'll see us download in a little bit. And finally, we're going to plug in the case into the motherboard as well. This is for like the power button and things like that. I will say that this case has a USB-C right here that actually can't connect to the motherboard without getting like an adapter. The game doesn't mention that, but very minor detail. Something you need to be aware of in real life when you're building though. And actually, I did forget one thing. Now finally, we're going to plug in our hard drive. First we'll do the SATA cable that goes into the motherboard right here. Then we'll do the power that goes into the power supply right there. And I believe that's everything all cabled up. Before you go ahead and close up the case, you always want to test it, and probably you'll want to test it before you even put the motherboard in the case. But that's kind of up to you, but definitely don't close that back panel until you test it. So we'll plug in the power here, plug in our first USB for the keyboard, another USB for the mouse, and finally our HDMI for the display. I use DisplayPort, but HDMI is fine as well. One other thing that I wish this game included is the power switch right here, because that's such a big detail that so many people forget to do is they think their PC is not working because the power switch isn't flipped to on. I've done it, you've done it, we've all done it. I really wish the game included that. It'd be super funny, but unfortunately they don't. But we're going to go ahead and press the power button, and we can see all of our LEDs coming on the graphics card, the fans, and the RAM. That's a good sign, but it does say no OS found, so we do need to install Windows, which is true of real life as well, but it wouldn't exactly go like this. In the game, all you have to do is grab a USB stick, pop it in. Now Windows is installed. Not exactly the same in real life, and it's actually not Windows. They have their own operating system for whatever reason in the game. But you can see that we did get a good boot. So now we're going to add the lighting software to go ahead and control our RGB. Now in real life this is a little bit more challenging, mainly because different brands can have like different software. This is an ASRock motherboard, so you'd use the ASRock Polychrome software, I believe it's called. But then depending on the fans you have, they might not play nice. I haven't been able to get the RAM to switch colors in my build. They don't do this red though, they do the rainbow cycling by default, which looks, you know, RGB rainbow anyways, so not a big deal. But you do have to kind of consider that. The game doesn't get into that, but you know, that's pretty high level at that point. We're going to go ahead and select all the lights and set them all to do rainbow like this. But on my build, they're all different colors. They're not all the same color. If you see here it just makes it all the same color at once, which is a little boring. We want different colors. So we're going to add some offset here, just like this, to get them on different colors so they're not all in sync with each other. I wish all the RGB software was this simple though. It's actually a great interface and works fairly well. But there we go. So now if you take a look, you can see that we constantly have all of the different colors going here. And this is about as close as we're going to get to replicating my exact PC. Let's go ahead and put the back panels on here, or the front panel, and then the back panel. Just like that. And my PC is fully built. So in conclusion, as you can see, it looks pretty similar to my real PC. I'll get like a little side-by-side here, but it's not exactly the same. Of course, the game has its limitations on like what parts are included, which is totally reasonable. As for the build process, it's not going to teach you everything you need to know, but it's definitely a great tool if you want to learn like what each part is, where you install each part, and kind of how that process goes. It's about as close as you're going to get besides watching a really in-depth YouTube video or doing it yourself. So I definitely have to recommend PC Build Simulator. I think it's still really impressive how close it is to actually building a real PC. And the game is like $8 every time there's a Steam sale, so I mean, who can go wrong? It's what can you expect for that much money? I definitely would recommend it to anyone interested in building a PC in the future, or even if you like building PCs like me. It's a lot of fun and it's kind of relaxing too. Or maybe you just can't get your hands on that 30 series graphics card and want to know what it feels like. At least you can do it online virtually. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, be sure to drop a like down below. Comment what you'd want to see in future videos, or if you've ever played this game, comment your experiences. We'd love to hear them. But thanks so much for watching. I've been Matthew from the RigMonkey team, and I'll see you next time. Have a good one.